has to stop. This is the worst thing in the history of America. And if we don't get justice here, it's all over. And, they keep talking. You see all the press. Oh, we're closer to a civil war than ever. We're closer to a civil war because the people in power are too cowardly to confront the truth, so that the American people have to come out into the streets with pitchforks to expose the Frankenstein monster that the federal government and a dozen lazy administrations have allowed to be created?
What a week. Jack Posobiec reported yesterday that Poland is in discussion with the United States to put nuclear warheads there. Earlier in the week, we had the Russian President Putin warning that he is not bluffing when it comes to nuclear war. Jack Maxey is here to address that, as well as our team here at Faith and Reason. But there's much more. There's total insanity going on over the LGBT push. We just heard in Vermont, there's a high school where the girls are now banned from their own girls' bathroom change room for objecting to the presence of biological males in there who call themselves females. And the New York Times, of all places, is reporting an explosion in women having their breasts removed because the transgender push is so extreme. Why is it so? Well, that's because the church, the Catholic Church, has actually fallen down on the issue in a massive way. We've got the two top contenders to take over from Pope Francis as the next pope, both LGBT pushers in the Catholic Church. This is Faith and Reason. Stay tuned. Father, can you launch us off with a prayer, please?
Love to, as always. What a grace and a blessing to be with you and pray to our Father in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Heavenly Father, we have big topics this week that challenge us in our faith, that challenge our understanding of what the church is and what it should be and what our role is in living out our faith and holding up the truth of our church. We ask for grace in our discussions, wisdom, knowledge, the fortitude then to go live it out. We ask this grace in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen. So, Jack, we're going to go first to you because all of this consternation over nuclear war has raised its head yet again this week with some seemingly alarming new developments. I'd love your take on it.
Well, as you said in the intro, Jack Posobiec, I guess, has reported that the Poles are in negotiations to get medium-range missiles located in their country. I think this is nonsense. I think it would put us in violation of multiple treaties that already exist. I think it's more of the bluster. And at the same time, remember, Poland just 3 days ago, their foreign minister sent a bill to his counterpart in the German government requesting $1.2 or $4 trillion for the damage caused to Poland in World War II. This is not an alliance that is really sticking together. Let's also remember 2 or 3 days ago, Zelensky tried to fast track his membership into NATO. And 6 months ago, people were questioning, well, Turkey might block it. This response was tepid at best. Even the U.S. was like, well, it'll be very difficult to bring you in the alliance while you're at war, triggering the NATO requirement to come to the defense of any member. I think this should show you just how strong the current support is inside the capitals of Western Europe for this continued charade in Ukraine. We saw last week the change of government in Italy. We saw last week the change of government in Sweden. What you are seeing, I think, is a populist revolt against governments that, through their foreign policy, have imposed these, unexplained burdens on their own populations, from immigration in Sweden and Italy to now the looming collapse of the Western European economies because of the embargo on natural gas from Russia, made worse just a few days ago because of, in Anthony Blinken's words, the explosion of the Nord Stream pipeline going into Germany. And now the big question is, who did that? Who benefits? I think that that needs to be defined. I also find it interesting that no one's really claiming that it wasn't an act of some kind of sabotage. But at the same time, this is hundreds of miles inside NATO territorial waters where this occurred, just a few miles off a Danish island and off the coast of Sweden. So the naval Spetsnaz team, combat swim all the way in there and do this unbeknownst to our NATO allies. If they did, then NATO's a totally incompetent organization and the whole continent could be taken down at will. My guess is it was probably someone on our side trying to force the issue where Russia and the West are concerned. And I think we're going to find out who that is eventually. Russia's now said they're more than happy to rebuild it. I don't think they would desire to do that if they were responsible, right? I think there'd be much more anger and bluster, accusations coming from their side. I think they're just watching this thing play out, just like they're watching the meat grinder of the Dnieper front tear the soul and heart out of the manhood of Ukraine. And it's happening before our eyes. Their casualties are much higher than Russia's. They have a much smaller population. Simple attrition will take them down. And I've said this before. Putin has never played the game the way the U.S. did in Iraq. If he had, he would have knocked out every power plant in the country 9 months ago. He would have knocked out all the rail intersections 9 months ago. He's actually shown incredible restraint compared to the way NATO goes and rescues countries that they think need to be liberated. And so I think we need to step back. I think that there's going to be a negotiated peace at some point. I think that Putin is going to keep those regions. I said it for 6, 7, 8 months. The Dnieper River is going to be the line, and they're going to be forced to suck it up. And now Europe, this is the great irony of this European economy on its knees because of their lack of fuel is going to be forced to pay the ransom to keep whoever replaces Zelensky happy and like, oh, okay, this is a good deal. We got another $100 billion off the backs of Western European and American taxpayers. And let's not forget another thing that the Europeans are doing, especially from a Christian perspective. The fact that the Europeans are more wealthy than the third world countries, and there is a limited supply of liquefied natural gas and a limited supply of ships that can transport it and degasify it on site, they are overbidding all of the third world. So you are now watching places that traditionally have been very Western aligned, like Vietnam and Thailand and Malaya and Indonesia and Pakistan and Bangladesh. You're watching them cut power to their people and cut gas that they used to cook with to their people so that the Germans can, genuflect about their moral superiority over Ukraine. I mean, the problems that this is causing around the world are really unimaginable, and the West needs to put a brake on all of it, in my opinion.
What's your take on endgame here? Where are they going with this? What is the agenda, if you will, of what seems like the Biden administration or whoever's behind the puppet? But what do you think is endgame for them?
I don't think they can perceive the endgame. I think that they come from a place of hubris and total arrogance. I think that they've been used to bullying the world for the last 50 years to do America's bidding. Just when I was in Switzerland this last spring, the U.S. government threatened the Swiss government over going after all their banks if Swiss did not give up their neutrality over Ukraine, which they did, right? You saw Sweden decide they want to join NATO, and guess what? The government that decided that got replaced big time. Same is going to happen in Finland. The people of the world are starting to wake up to the fact that they are not simply puppets that people in Foggy Bottom in Washington, D.C. and in Langley pull the strings of. They have human agency and they have concerns of their own that don't necessarily align with a progressive desire to make Putin go away.
Liz, your take on this, but I'd also like to hear the ramifications for Europe, because we've also seen a new crackdown, if you will, on freedom in Europe.
Well, I'd certainly defer to Jack in the geopolitical analysis. My concern as a Catholic, of course, is it's reminiscent of the warnings of and the secrets of Fatima, where Our Lady said, if Russia is not consecrated by the Pope to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, she would spread her errors. Of course, many of us are looking at what's happening, as Jack has described it, as are we now in the end times? Is this the annihilation that has been foretold? Certainly there's a great deal of chaos in the anticipation of a cold winter without heating oil, without gas in Europe. It's almost unimaginable. The deindustrialization of the West in a matter of months, to think that Italy is now coming down with some very tough measures they're not going to be able to stay warm in Italy and other countries, England as well. So these are very tumultuous times, coupled with the geopolitical machinations that Jack described. We're also dealing with a huge crackdown in England as well as Ireland against religious freedom. We're seeing for the first time, actually, the incredible militancy, I would say, of the trans movement, and that it has been extremely effective in forcing law enforcement to be weaponized to do their bidding, and to use freedom of speech as in criminalize freedom of speech actually in support of their agenda to push the trans movement. We saw, for example, Caroline Farrow, one of the founders and heads of a group called Citizen Go, pro-life, pro-family, in England. This week, maybe yesterday, I think it was, or the day before, she's very active on Twitter. She is very protective she's very much like Maloney in the sense of God, family, and country. Very anti-LGBT agenda, which is rampantly running all over England as well as America. And so she engages with these people on Twitter, and they filed a complaint with their local police. There was, and she didn't violate any law. The police came to her door, 6'3" policemen banged down her door, demanded all of her electronic phones, her children's iPad. She's got a daughter who has autism and relies heavily on her education from the iPad that was taken by the police. She was strip searched in front of the police. They had no warrant for her arrest, except there was a complaint that she was harassing somebody on Twitter. When she asked what precisely were the things that were the subject of the complaint, there were memes that she herself had not even put on Twitter. She was in jail in a cell for, I think, 8 hours. But we've seen this with Enoch Burke, a school teacher in Ireland, who is in his, I think, 30th day of imprisonment for refusing to use pronouns, the new pronouns, gender ideology pronouns, with his students. And he's a strong Christian. I mean, these are Christians who are now being persecuted by the militant trans ideology movement, and the media, as well as law enforcement. Shockingly, law enforcement is doing the bidding of this very wealthy, very well-funded, radical movement that is really trying to transform not only our schools, but also families. We know, actually, the New York Times reported that gender mutilation, breast augmentation, breast removal, genital mutilation of breasts is skyrocketing in America. with children, parents taking their children to these children's hospitals. There's a lot of money behind this movement. It's frankly, as a child advocate, and I fought genital mutilation against women who were in the Islam, families where they were subjected to genital mutilation, never thinking that genital mutilation would become such a fad in the United States and around the world. And, puberty blockers, they're handing them out like candy now. Planned Parenthood, obviously very cleverly recognizes there's a lot of money behind this new movement. So this is what we're dealing with. It's shocking, it's dystopian, but it's a worldwide movement. This gender ideology, and people have to understand this, this was the foundation of Marxism. Because not only was it succeeding in depopulation, it was succeeding in putting an obstacle between the children and family and their parents. It was imposing the state in as the parent who would raise the children. So this is what this is not, the newfangled, fad. It is hardcore Marxism. And we've seen it, back in the 1980s at the UN conventions where they were meeting. So people have to recognize Marxism has many facets, and we're dealing with the criminalization and weaponization of not only speech, but also the ability of parents to raise their children and the protection of children's innocence, which first and foremost is under assault around the world.
It's incredible. There's so much to bring together there, but to think that this assault really by police on Carolyn Farrow in England happens within a week or so of what happened with Mark Houck in the United States, where, I'm here still in Philly, where Mark, the clinic, the abortuary, the Planned Parenthood, where Mark Houck used to be giving counseling to try and help women stay out of the clinic, where this pro-abortion escort who brings the women into the clinic was there to confront Mark Houck's 12-year-old son right in his face. When Mark asked him, please, move away from my son, he wouldn't do it, right up in his face again. So Mark Houck pushes him back. And of course, what ensues, the police won't charge him, but he tried to go to court even, didn't work. But the Attorney General's office goes after him. Mark was willing to turn himself in. And this is from a long, long time ago. Yet the next time he hears from him is last Friday. And what happens is that, 30 agents or so from the FBI banging on his door, 7 o'clock in the morning, and freaking out his children and wife. It's unreal. Again, with the no warrant thing, they didn't seem to have one. Finally, one of them got it from the car. But he begged them before he opened the door. I'm going to open the door for you, but I've got little kids here. I've got 7 little children here. And opens the door, freak the children out. So in that same week, by the way, the same last week that you had the 84-year-old pro-lifer actually shot, and nothing's happening there. Now, months ago, about 20 congressmen put out a letter to the Department of Justice asking them what the heck's going on. Over the last 2 years, we've seen 160 anti-Catholic, anti-pro-life attacks with nobody doing anything by a named group, Jane's Revenge. And the FBI is doing nothing, but they're raiding pro-lifers. Remember, David DeLayden, Joan Andrews Bell, all of them raided by the FBI. And this is happening here and now in England as well, with Enoch Burke and with Carolyn Farrow. So this is a spreading disease, but people are fighting back. I love what Jack said about how about the election in Italy, because you saw Giorgia Meloni take over. But get this, in Italy, you had the primary abortion activist. Not only was she an abortionist, an illegal abortionist, she came back and became a politician and then worked in the Communist Party to pass abortion legislation, homosexual legislation, blah, blah, blah. Naturally, she was praised by Pope Francis as a great hero of the nation. But that same Emma Bonino, who, by the way, was going around to speak at Catholic churches because the Pope was such a fan, was actually voted out. She was voted out by a pro-lifer who ran against her. So indeed, tides are changing. And I'm hoping what we're seeing is some of that last kick of the can by the bad guys, because they see their time is coming to an end.
And also, as Jack knows better than anybody, that same FBI refuses to investigate the Hunter Biden laptop, has suppressed the Hunter Biden laptop with social media. And so this is our law enforcement. We have to take a hardcore look at it. It's very, very disconcerting, and probably the most disconcerting thing about all of this we're experiencing. That we don't have, law enforcement doesn't have our back anymore. Law enforcement has been turned against us.
This is what I wanted to ask you about, Jack, because I think with the suffering of those children by the FBI, so unbelievable. But I pray that that will be the spark to inform Americans, really the world, about the corruption in the FBI. You've been singing this tune for so long, and it's been totally ignored. People sworn up and down, oh, it's all fake, it's all propaganda. And yet you knew, you had the evidence. You showed us the evidence. You showed it to so many people. LifeSite News has been there for you, but you were trying to get it to major media who refused for the longest time, finally picked up by some, not everybody yet, but some. What do you think of what's happened to these poor children, the Houck family, and it's hopefully moving the needle so that people can finally recognize the massive corruption in the FBI?
Well, I think if there's anything I can be proud of in the last year, I do believe that we've moved the needle on the consensus concerning the FBI, their patriotism, their value to your average American. Are they an enemy of our freedoms? I think these are all questions that need to be asked. I was gratified to see on Fox News last night. Now, he's getting headlines all around the world. Bo Belinsky says that the FBI stole the 2020 election. You know, I've been saying that since day one. And let's figure out all the other things that they did. I mean, there's so many questions, and it's not just FBI. My guess is the FBI becomes the fall guy for all of America's discontent concerning law enforcement. But realistically, we need open hearings. We need church committee style hearings slash Watergate hearings to discuss the malfeasance that's gone on inside that agency and inside other three-letter agencies. And we need to decide as the American people, are we going to allow these people to continue to act so brazenly and with such disregard for human rights, human safety, global stability on our behalf going forward? Or are we going to take back our intelligence agencies and put them into a responsible place where they are concerned solely with the national security of this nation and keep themselves out of meddling in other people's problems from one end of the earth to the other? I think that this is going to happen. I think that the FBI has a broken reputation at this point. I think it's very clear, and I've said it for a year and a half, that the counterintelligence group led by Price, Stapp, and Strzok were the ones who buried Hillary's laptop. They were the ones who buried Hunter's laptop. They were the ones who invaded Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago 3 weeks ago. This is an out-of-control agency, and you have to remember the counterintelligence unit at the FBI really works for the CIA. They, they answer to the director, but at the end of the day, they do the agency's bidding. And this is all sleight of hand, once again, to avoid the statutory requirements from allowing the CIA to spy on Americans. This is a concerted effort by multiple agencies. If the audience needs proof of that, all you have to look at is the letter on the 19th of October, 2020, declaring Hunter Biden's laptop a fabrication of Russian intelligence, signed by Clapper, Brennan, Hayden, Panetta, and 46 other, professionals, all of whom still have their security clearances, all of whom still make hundreds of thousands of dollars a year because they have their security clearances. We need to clean house. And a perfect example of this is there's a guy named Cofer Black, former CIA case officer, worked in the Middle East, Khartoum, Saudi Arabia. He was in Saudi Arabia at the same time that John Brennan, surprise, was there. He leaves the agency. My understanding is he gets a plush deal at the State Department. Yes, that's CIA's other secret sibling. And literally, He ends up on the board of directors at Burisma in 2016 with the same deal that Hunter has. He never called up Uncle John Brennan, told him anything that was going on. Nobody in Langley knew. Pompeo takes Gina Haspel and makes her the head of CIA, full well knowing that Gina Haspel was station chief in London when they ran the whole Russian collusion Steele dossier, coup against an election and potentially then a sitting president. This has to stop. This is the worst thing in the history of America. And if we don't get justice here, it's all over. And they keep talking. You see all the press. Oh, we're closer to a civil war than ever. We're closer to a civil war because the people in power are too cowardly to confront the truth, so that the American people have to come out into the streets with pitchforks to expose the Frankenstein monster that the federal government and a dozen lazy administrations have allowed to be created. That's what will happen. But responsible people would like to, and myself, and I'm sure this whole panel and the rest of our audience would like to see the Constitution function. And going back to what Liz said earlier about that woman in Great Britain and the teacher in Ireland, one thing we have is a Constitution. Let's fashion it into a whip and run these money lenders out of our temple. I mean, we can do it. It just takes some courage. And as we talk about the LGBTQ and all this nonsense, I have to say, I think we need to separate the gay and lesbian community from the trans community. I don't think that they are in perfect unity. I think that the trans community is really a mentally ill subset of this that has taken power, an inordinate amount of power, because they are the squeaky wheel and everybody is too afraid to criticize them. But I think that's beginning to change. I think that good people of all sexual orientations are starting to go like, hey, there's a difference between having a boyfriend and surgically altering something. And when you go to the Marxism, you have to kill God, because how else are you going to justify the mutilation of these people made in the image of God?
The reason why LGBTQ is full on in support of trans is because trans is so far out there. If you get the people to normalize and accept trans, then what they're doing is so far less than that, then by definition, as a fortiori, lesser included thing, all the more reason why that they should be accepted as well, and that love is love. So they're fully behind that, which is contrary to any Christian. It's not just Catholic Church, it's Christianity as a whole. As you were pointing out, they're made in God's image and likeness. God doesn't make mistakes. So if God made Bruce Jenner a man, God did not make a mistake. Bruce Jenner has a mental illness. But if you can get the public to bow before them out of fear that if they go against trannies, they're going to go against all homosexuality and all the lesbians and the Joy Behars and the Whoopi Goldbergs of the world, you're going to go against all this.
But my point, Father, is I think that homosexuals, mainstream homosexuals and lesbians, they don't want to be aligned with these people. And they've made all these strides through time, okay? Maybe we disagree or we agree, support or don't support. But the fact of the matter is their entire, quote, civil rights movement of the last 60 years has now been hijacked by this Frankenstein fringe, which is minuscule.
It's absolutely minuscule. But when you see a bunch of LGBTQ people running around with trans rights or human rights on their shirts too, they gain by promoting trans. And in fact, that's why you get all the birds of a feather flocking together at all these disparate groups, such as Black Lives Matter, such as Planned Parenthood and abortion rights. And they all gather together because they know together one voice is louder than the rest, and you dare not go against any of them. And so it's just like it's like these alliances, these entangling alliances that George Washington warned us about. They're all entangled together. I'm not disagreeing with you, Jack. I understand.
No. I understand. Look,
everything I've seen, I've never yet seen one single homosexual say, hey, you trannies, you've taken it too far. I've not seen that. I've not seen a hint of it anywhere what I have seen is that entire group of people is supporting the other people because they feel so victimized themselves, the homosexuals, that they'll support anybody else that seems like they're a victim.
I've seen it on a personal level, and I will tell you, I deal with a lot of young people, and most of these people are fully indoctrinated. And the real reality is that they feel like the trans movement has gone too far. Let's remember, it was 18 through 35-year-olds who elected the president of Italy. It was the same that elected the right wing in Sweden. The young people who have suffered under this kind of odd dystopian childhood that they've had for the last 20 years are waking up that this nonsense that we learned from kindergarten through high school is a joke, has no bearing on the real world. And I think that they're beginning to mature in terms of their viewpoints. So I also am gratified to see, I know lots of very well privileged kids who are deciding not to go to college. What's the point? What is the point? Read the 100 great books, and get your degree in welding and have a nice life.
Exactly.
There is a difference in history that might be illuminating here. So 20 years ago, we used to get the communiques of different LGBT activist groups, and we knew what their inside shtick was. First of all, they intentionally distanced themselves from the pedophile movement. That was always part of the movement of gays and lesbians. If you remember the North American Boy Love Association, that was all about gay men having little boys. They moved to Canada. That's why I remember it. At the time, O'Reilly Factor had me on, and Bill O'Reilly asked me about it, and I explained to him, well, the ones advocating for it were the same homosexual groups and advocating for the age of homosexual sex to come down to 14 in Canada, which it did, which is why NAMBLA, the North American Boy Love Association, moved from America to Canada. And so O'Reilly was really mad because he wanted to make that distinction that you're suggesting here that, well, he said, oh, you're going to blame it all on the gays. The difficulty is, the truth is, if the shoe fits, you got to wear it. And here's the point. You do have the majority, the vast majority, and especially the spokesman of the LGBT movement pushing for the acceptance of now the trans. And they purposefully back then distanced themselves from the pedophile community. Now they're welcoming them back because now it's in vogue. They can call it intergenerational sex instead of pedophilia. So now it's all fine. You see that starting to creep in because that's the next one. Once we've discombobulated the whole population, so they all think, oh, this is all fun and good.
You're ascribing that fringe perspective to be a universal perspective. I don't believe that. I mean, for example, let's just look at our own church, right? Are we mainstream? No. We've got a pope who supports these people more than probably the mainstream amongst them supports it, right? You don't think that your average gay guy sees some dude in high heels with a 5 o'clock shadow getting blessed by the Pope, and he doesn't think, man, something's wrong with that dude, right? Gary, something's wrong with him, huh? We can't ascribe this sort of Halloween dress up nonsense to the entire community any more than we could look at the priesthood and say, oh, they're all homosexuals and pedophiles. That would be unfair to the whole priesthood. But yet statistically, there are a lot of people who could make that argument and have it stick. So I think we have to be very careful about painting groups with a broad brush. I think there's consensus among all people that pedophilia is bad. I think that there's consensus. Now, there might be not a lot of bravery in saying it, but I think, quietly in the corner at the cocktail party, everybody is going to agree with you that transvestites are mentally ill. Ironically, the AMA used to declare them mentally ill, used to declare even homosexuality mentally ill. And 2 days ago, the AMA requested that the Justice Department prosecute reporters who reveal which hospitals around the country are performing these surgeries because of the bad press that accrued to Vanderbilt. So I don't think that this is a universal thing. I think that really, in some regards, the transvestite movement has pushed the needle so far that you're going to see it kind of swing back to more like the mid-90s, where it's hey, everybody do what they got to do. But
or this, in the mid-90s, Every homosexual couple was also about protecting the regular definition of marriage. On the inside of those chat rooms with all of the leaders, of the small leaders, not the top leaders, but they were all discussing what? Marriage. What the heck do we want? They used a different word, but what the heck do we want with monogamous marriage? We have nothing to do with monogamy anyway. Every boy and girl wants a mom and a dad. But the point was, they wanted nothing to do with marriage. But the leaders among the activists knew that they needed marriage as a societal stamp of approval in order to advance their cause. So they all went for it, even when the majority, and I would really say it was the majority of homosexuals, even activists, weren't on board with same-sex marriage. And yet they went for it as a movement because the leaders showed that they needed it. I would say that we have the same thing here with trans, and that's why they push so hard to complete absurdity, so that you have these guys who are ridiculously taking over women's sports. Feminists are all shut up because why? This is where the agenda, they say, needs to go. Maybe for another dystopian purpose, to make people lose their minds enough to believe absolutely anything and everything.
Just a quick note before we return. If you would like to stay up to date on LifeSite's coverage of the latest life, family, and culture news, subscribe to one of our many newsletters by going to lifesitenews.com/subscribe. And if you'd like to help us bring our truth-telling coverage to millions around the world, please consider making a one-time or monthly donation at give.lifesitenews.com. And now, back to the video.
If you have the American Medical Association on board, who is behind that? What morons, and they are morons, are behind that?
It's money. The New York Times just announced today that it could be a $5 billion a year business. The reason the woman got pilloried at Vanderbilt, even by some of her peers who agree with the surgeries, was like, well, you shouldn't have said could be a big money maker for the hospital. You know, people don't like to hear that. And so I think that what's going to happen is, and Liz, you brought it up earlier, there's laws against genital mutilation that were on the books all over this planet to suppress the Islamic practice, right? Why not use those same laws to keep this from happening?
Or in Africa, same thing in Africa, all that mutilation going on in Africa. Why are we allowing it here? Who is controlling this? What the Democrats are 100% on board with all of this.
I think that this has all gone too far, and I think that the pushback is coming. Now, let's also remember gay marriage. They had a vote on it in California. It lost 58 to 42. They needed the Supreme Court to make it the law of the land, just like they needed the Supreme Court to make abortion, a one-size-fits-all abortion, the law of the land.
Both of which are completely unconstitutional from a legal standpoint. Roe v. Wade was unconstitutional. So was this, what was it called? Oglesby or something like that? That Oglethorpe, whatever that was, completely, totally unconstitutional.
We'll see. Let's just let time play out. But I'm more disturbed by the church sort of not taking a moral stand on all these topics. There's a big difference between pastoral care for these individuals and then celebration of their sinful acts.
Putting a rainbow flag above the Knoxville Cathedral.
Because the rainbow flag is the symbol of God's covenant with the Israelites, right? That's why they chose it. Let's be very clear. And there was some obsession there because the original symbol was a pink triangle from the Holocaust till, the Jewish community said, hey, guys, look, we lost 6 million, a couple dozen really doesn't match up. And they stopped it. But then they came back with the rainbow flag. I don't think there are any coincidences.
We're talking about the tyranny of the minority, right? And as a result of what is happening this very day in the most prestigious children's hospitals in the United States and around the world, children are being permanently mutilated, permanently destroyed with puberty blockers. It may take 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, but those very aggrieved, abused children will come back as adults and talk about this horrible abuse, destruction of their life, their fertility. But it's the minority. That's a given. But we are being silenced. And they also have the ability of the Catholic Church, On July 29th, 2013, let us not forget what was said by Jorge Bergoglio. I believe it was a day in infamy in the church. And anybody with half a brain would have known that we were going to be in trouble under Jorge Bergoglio. What did he say? If someone is gay and he searches for the Lord and has goodwill, who am I to judge? And from that moment forward, Jorge Bergoglio has pushed a homosexual agenda, hired and promoted homosexuals, homosexualists, those priests, cardinals, and bishops who are primarily favorable to the homosexual agenda. He has turned the other way when there were gay orgies with drugs, and the Roman police were called, and cardinals were at those events. He has time and time again protected homosexual predators and promoted them. Let's not forget Cardinal McCarrick. And now at the end of his 9 years, maybe 10 years, maybe more, we're now looking at some prominent Vatican curial appointments. You know, policy is personnel, personnel is policy. And the policy of the Vatican is a gay-friendly policy. Pope Francis just recently appointed Cardinal Jose Tolentino as the prefect of the Dicastery for Culture and Education. That's what we've been talking about, right? The infiltration of this transgender gay sexualization of our children in the educational system around the world. And Tolentino is now in charge of education, and which has been really taken the brunt of the brutal onslaught of this Marxist gender ideology. Secondly, Francis has elevated Cardinal Matteo Zuppi, who many believe is the next pope. And you probably remember once Giorgio Meloni was elected, Zuppi, not Bergoglio, Zuppi immediately issued a statement against the democratically elected Giorgia Meloni, stating that the bishops, the Italian bishops, would criticize her in the most severest terms for her position on illegal migration and any other positions that she takes. Bishop Johann Boni of Antwerp gave the blessing of the LGBT couples. He's aligned with Pope Francis. He also said that he spoke to Pope Francis, and Pope Francis blesses this and is in agreement with this. So what we are seeing now at the end of this pontificate is the really rolling out and the elevation, which has been 9 years of this. Let's be honest about it. But now he is putting in place, I think, quite rapidly, he's just flooding the the conclave of cardinals. He's also flooding the bishops with these homosexualists, and who have been, Father, you know better than I, outwardly promoting this, not the Catholic agenda, not the moral agenda, but the radical Marxist gender ideology promotion of homosexuality. And that, folks, is the 2023 Synod on Synodality. That's what is going to be rolled out. So, it really does, Jack, when you raise the issue of the church has always been the bulwark, always been the obstacle, no more. Once Francis had his press conference in the sky, that's when we knew we were in for trouble.
Legit question, though. I mean, we talk about the church, we talk about homosexuality, popular culture, whatever. Which became gay first, the church or popular culture? I would say it was the Vatican that drifted in that direction many decades before, at least in terms of practice and at least in terms of who they opened the seminaries up to, long before it was seen to be normalized in the regular culture. So to a certain extent, I think that one of the frightening things that we have to deal with as Catholics, and I'd love to have this question answered, what percentage of sitting priests are homosexualists in terms of their bent? I'm not necessarily accusing them all of being practicing, but it does seem to be a larger number than the general population. And I'm asking that as a legitimate question of a faithful follower. I'd like to know.
James Martin has already come out publicly and said 40%. And I told you he was lowballing it because he knows it would drive people crazy if they thought it was a 50% or more. But in this group that I'm associating with, these people in the intelligence community, they say 88% of the bishops are homosexualists. So we can't be surprised that what is going on is going on. So, and why they're promoting it within the ranks and kicking out all the good men, like that book my Uncle Rose said. If you're wondering what the percentage is, I can tell it's definitely more than half. And so how can we be surprised? Listen, if it looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it is a duck.
We can point to 1929, can't we? When Belladad, who was head of the Communist Party, was charged with, from the Soviets, was charged to place over 1,000 men into the Catholic seminaries in the United States. She claimed that they were homosexual. She claimed that by 1950, when she had been converted back to the faith by, thank you, Fulton Sheen, that many of those men were now cardinals and in prominent positions in the Vatican. And that's why I keep saying this is a Marxist ideology, a strategy by the Marxists to infiltrate the church, to infiltrate our, God-fearing society, to devolve into chaos. If we want to talk statistics, in the John Jay report, of the victims of clergy abuse, 80% were young boys. So if you have the control class of all men, priests, who were accused and found guilty of abusing quote unquote minors, 80% of those victims were boys. So that gives you a sense of.
And they weren't, the average age, I think, was between 14 and 15 years old too. So this gaslighting by the popular media to be like, oh, these are straight up pedophiles. No, these are pederasts. These are, classic, homosexual relationships, if we want to look back into ancient history. But I think that one of the things that we have to do as Catholics, if you notice this drift of the church towards this point of view, with it comes a kind of arrogance and with it a misogyny. Have you noticed, look, they turned their back on the cross while preparing the host for Vatican II. They have sidelined the Virgin Mother, right? She's not important anymore. It has been a process. I foresee a time where we could have a huge schism in the church again, because I know so many people just don't bother going. They're just tired of being lectured to about progressive ideals every Sunday. And it offends them, right? Or they go there like me and they just sit there and try to concentrate on the rosary for an hour.
There's a de facto schism in the church right now, Jack. So, I mean, that it might be spoken of more openly is where we're headed. But there is a schism in the church right now, and it is an unbridgeable chasm. The schism is present and accounted for.
It is. Father, you and I were both at the March for Catholics in Peoria. I spoke there the day before you, and just the bishop barred all these Catholics marching for the faith from praying the rosary in the cathedral and in the churches along the route. Give us the details on that, if you would.
There were about 650 people there, including 2 high schools, all marching because as the leader of this whole organization, 25-year-old, a magnificent young Catholic, began this organization to establish a march specifically for Catholics. He said there was something like 250 marches in the country per year, but none specifically Catholic. Even the March for Life is everybody. But how about we stand up for the faith as Catholics, actually be Catholic and be proud of it, instead of the shame that we felt for the last 20 years because of what these bishops have done and covered up. So here we have 650 Catholics going, and they wanted to begin this march to a public pavilion by praying a decade of the rosary in the cathedral, wherein lies Fulton J. Sheen, right in Peoria. A cathedral that should be open to the world. It is open to the Muslims. It's open to the Protestants. It's open to anybody that wants to go in there. But these 650 Catholics, Bishop Tilka, who is a filthy fraud of a bishop, borrowed these Catholics In the end, he still hasn't come out and said why, but through his office, the backstory is, well, we don't like your speakers, amongst which were Doug Barry, who's such a profound holy Catholic man, and Archbishop Vigano. He barred 650 Catholics who marched, prayed the whole joyful mysteries down to the pavilion, had these beautiful speeches by such as Doug Barry and Vigano. And then we marched back praying the five sorrowful mysteries, all during which none of us were allowed in any church in his diocese. People, you need to understand, Catholics around the globe, these monsters and miters control the land, but they do not control the faith. And we don't need his permission to pray the rosary. And we don't need his permission to celebrate the holy sacrifice of the Mass. They're afraid of men standing up to be Catholic. They're afraid of real Catholic. Listen, all those young people, you saw them, John Henry, all those young people involved in that march, to know that in there is Bishop Fulton J. Sheen, who warned us about the bishops and the priests, and they were locked out.
It was Archbishop Vigano last week at the Catholic Identity Conference who said, and Father, I think you must be just channeling him. Vigano said, the Apostolic See is occupied by a declared enemy of the Church of Christ. Never in history have we witnessed a systemic betrayal of the faith, morals, liturgy, and ecclesiastic discipline, favored and even promoted by the supreme authority of the Church itself, in the complicit silence of the hierarchy and in the uncritical acceptance of many of the clerics and the faithful. In that cathedral is the body of this holy man who educated a generation of Catholics in the United States and around the world, Fulton Sheen. He was the one who warned America about communism, which is what we've been talking about. And we talk about faith and reason here, right? We need to educate ourselves about communism. Read Fulton Sheen. Fulton Sheen saw what was going on last week in Peoria. He's turning over in his grave.
It could be argued that he is the single most important Catholic in the United States in the last 100 years. Now, he's not up for canonization. These vipers, these monsters and miters, have stood in the way and have torpedoed the cause, because he was against their communism, against their socialism. He was the one that warned the American faithful, the truly faithful, about those vipers that are enemies of the state. What Vigano said should resound in the heart of every single faithful Catholic. But what he said is to those Catholics, the few who are on one side of the unbridgeable chasm of the schism, the people on the other side of the unbridgeable chasm, the many, they don't care.
Well, Father, I'm sure you fired up the faithful down in Peoria, and Joe Riggi, who is, in charge of our warpath, is an inspiration for all of us. I would encourage everybody to go to their website. We have a group in Illinois, Pray for Illinois. Go to prayforillinois.com. This is a movement of the faithful, driven, I believe, by a resurgence of praying the rosary. Our Lady is leading the way. She's holding our hand. She's pointing us in the right direction, what we need to do. And so, to me, that's very hopeful. And give me one Joe Riggi, that's all I need, right?
Well, what does Satan say? If there were three John Vianney's, he'd be defeated. Give us 3 Joe Riggis. That guy's amazing at 25.
Sadly, though, like this poor guy who created this great march, he likely would not be able to be accepted in an American seminary today. I have a cousin who went to try and join. They told him, you're just a little too rigid in your faith. You seem to be like you believe too much.
I saw it with my own eyes. Yeah, with my own eyes. I saw it and I witnessed it and I experienced it in seminary. And I only graduated, 14 years ago. This is not of recent vintage, and it's not going away.
I think Liz is 100% correct. I think that the rosary is the key. And you have to remember, look back at the history of our faith. So many times it's these, very strong Catholic women who lead us in the right direction. I mean, let's think of St. Augustine's mother, Monica, let's look at, our Virgin Mother and just her example of grace for all of us, right? Anytime you're in suffering, you can look at her suffering and realize that, like, okay, maybe I don't have it that bad. We just need to soldier on. I think I'm very confident that, just as Archbishop Vigano said 2 months ago, the children of light outnumber the children of darkness. So, just start carrying that little Bic lighter around with you and flashing it every time you see something going wrong.
I also think it's our persecuted priests, our canceled priests, who have been, suffered, who are the ones who actually spoke up, Father, as you know, about what was going on in the seminary and what was going on in parishes. They've been punished. And, finally, the final statement from Vigano is that he says, it is necessary that all of us make ourselves worthy of this grace with a life of holiness and with a courageous witness to the faith in which we have been baptized. It will be by the practice of the virtues and the constant prayer of the Holy Rosary that will strengthen us on this path and move Our Lady with compassion, so that in the restoration of the public worship of Christ's church, we can see an anticipation of the eternal glory that has been prepared for us. So, Father, what you leading that rosary, you were doing exactly what needs to be done. Even though you were, kept out of a magnificent cathedral, God heard the prayers of those 600 plus and saw your witness. And, as long as we have good holy priests witnessing, leading, we're going to be okay. And so I thank you for that.
These young people put me to shame. I wish I would have had that, even a leadership that would have led me to do those sorts of things at that same young age. And fortunately, Joe Riggi did have that. Guy is amazing. He had a real foundation in faith and Catholicism and leading a holy life. And now he's with his brothers. They're trying to stick together because there's strength and accountability. It makes you more fervent in your living your life of faith. I was just privileged to be amongst them.
I think we should leave with a political statement. As Peoria goes, so goes the nation, right? Yeah, that's what they say in politics, having been a lifelong Illinoisan. So let's hope that'll
be careful about that, because the nation's been going like Peoria for 40 years now. So Peoria's reversing.
Yes, that's a good sign, I'd say.
We're in a fight, but we're always in a fight, right? In the good old days, the church would train us that we were soldiers for the Lord. And so we are, and be happy warriors. We win, they lose.
Hey, Jack, can I tell you one quick line that I mentioned when I was down in Peoria? I just had hand scribbled notes on half a sheet. Doug Barry started talking about how soldiers fought. So that's what brought it up. And the thought came to me as I stood there, and I wrote a couple of tiny little sentences on my piece of paper. It was about, well, people go AWOL in the force. We would follow Patton to our death because Patton was a man and he led. The soldiers abandoned their brothers. If they went AWOL, if they went MIA and were caught, they were executed for abandoning and putting everybody else at risk. The bishops have gone AWOL in this country for the last 40, 50 years, as if we don't have 5 billion reasons to define their AWOLness. They went AWOL when they abandoned us in 2020 and denied us sacraments of grace. They have one job to do: give us those sacraments so that our souls are in a state of grace should we die, if it was half as bad as what they said it was.
How about every time one of these bishops is at the altar visiting around his area, we have the traditional Catholics show up with a bullhorn and say the rosary in Latin over and over and over again, so that they can hear it through the windows.
Lastly, I wanted to talk about the Catholic Identity Conference where I was just over the weekend. So one of the speakers was Diane Montagna, a Vaticanist from Rome. And she mentioned how the two top contenders for the papacy, at least on the left side of the spectrum, but really they are the top contenders anyway that everybody's talking about, are, as you mentioned, Liz, Cardinal Zuppi, but also Cardinal Tagley, both LGBT activists within the Catholic Church. And I think a lot has been said about Zuppi already, because he did have one of his priests in his diocese do a homosexual blessing, like a Thanksgiving mass for a homosexual couple, then tried to deny it after the fact, was caught. It was very embarrassing, because there's Zuppi saying, oh, no, it wasn't meant to be that. It was something else. But the priest who actually said the mass and the homosexual couple were like, oh no, this is a Thanksgiving mass for our ceremony. So he was caught out in a kind of a lie, horrible stuff. But this is an LGBT promoting cardinal who is the top contender for the Pope. But a lot of people think because he's Italian, maybe because he's such a darling of the left, perhaps it will be Tagley. But Tagley is every bit as much a homosexual activist within the church. I want you guys to watch this. This is a clip from a video put out by Tagley's diocese in the Philippines, and it's like a test. They called it the Lazarus Project. How Catholics would react if they put into the church a homosexual couple, a transgender, and a prostitute, and a homeless person, I guess. But what would the reaction be? So they put up a fake window through which they were filming a camera, and then in an actual mass, as disgusting as that is, they film them entering the church and the discomfort of people. Obviously, people with children are going to be uncomfortable if a almost unclad woman comes into the church, which wearing what looks like a bra, and obviously flaunting a homosexual couple who are holding hands and coddling each other during the mass. It's sick that would go on, but this went on under Tagley. So these are homosexual activist cardinals who are the most likely ones to be elected the next pope. I think, I hope, I pray that's a nightmare that will never come to fruition, but that's what we're looking at.
Lalaki, babae, bakla, ang Diyos ay muling nabuhay para sa ating lahat. Rich or poor, young or old, in all walks of life, pinag-aralan o walang pinag-aralan, ang Diyos ay muling nabuhay para sa ating lahat. Lalo-lalo na sa mga...
I can't imagine that there isn't enough sense amongst enough of the cardinals to know that if they put somebody up there that is that radical, that's going to fly and the Catholic Church won't go away. Unless that's their goal, to destroy the church, and then they get to be, according to synodality, the lord of their own fiefdom, which is their geographical border and all the money that goes with it. Maybe that's all they want, is to destroy that one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, so that you have, I think there's 4,000 dioceses roughly in the world, have 4,000 mini popes in essence. I just find it hard to believe that they would be that, or that God actually will allow that. Although what God is going to do, just like he allowed the death of his son, he's going to allow the apparent death of his son, the apparent death of his church, in order to resurrect it and drive out all the bad guys. So it took him 37 years to utterly destroy the people who crucified Jesus. They asked that Jesus's blood be on their head and on their children, and they got their wish 37 years later. So it might take a while. We might not see it, the fire from the sky coming down that's going to destroy these filthy monsters. But I still am incredulous to think that there would be enough that would think they can go that far. I mean, they got Bergoglio in there. They knew what they were doing when they got him. They knew exactly what they were getting. But I find it hard to believe that either of those, and you know what the whole saying goes, is those people that go in as papabeals or popabeals or whatever they are, tend not to be the ones that eventually come out. But
if 50 to 80% of the priesthood is gay, why should anybody be surprised if, you know, that the bullpen that they have to choose from for the papacy is the same way?
exactly.
We're headed for a crisis of faith, and I think it's already occurring. You watched the churches of North America empty. I literally, every time place where I see faith, it is in a church that has our mother as a prominent portion of that church itself, and with devotion to her, because it unifies also the family, right? You know, the mother and the father and Christ. We've already broken the church. I guess the only thing that, you know, somewhat saddens me, does this mean that like all the beautiful cathedrals of Western Europe are just going to become like tourist destinations? To me, that saddens me somewhat. But at the same time, you know, faith is much more than a building, right? It is something unseen. It is something that we hold in our hearts.
You know what those buildings do for us, Jack, though, is they ultimately will be, although they're museums for a while, they ultimately will be the truth about beauty, goodness versus the anathema of the way of these godless, worldly leaders of the church. And when you finally, when the light bulb goes on and you see Chartres, Notre Dame, Cologne, and you see these worthless monster vipers promoting every sort of godless thing going, what it'll do is you'll say, I want that, not them. So ultimately they will, I think, serve as a sign of God to call people back, just like the traditional Latin Mass is the sign of God set against so starkly soap bubbles and Blaise Supich's churches.
And the unity of the Latin Mass too. I mean, listen, that created, it's almost as if I've said it many times, we built a Tower of Babel inside the Vatican and expected to have, this goes to their arrogance. They expected to have a different outcome than what God told us would be the outcome from that.
When Jorge Bergoglio was elected Pope and the P2, the largest Freemason organization, celebrated it that night, you know, the front page story. They also recently celebrated the appointment of Cardinal Zuppi. And I think that's a warning to all of us. Look, we cannot be naive anymore. Under our noses, the St. Gallen Mafia plotted and planned for over 10 years for the replacement of a modernist pope. They weren't initially successful, but they were the second time. The deck is stacked with all these appointments. I think clearly Bergoglio has over the majority of appointments to the cardinal conclave and the cardinals. And also, I think, you know, they are laying the groundwork with the Synod on synodality to really relax all the dogma. The Mass will be irrecognizable. And so I think we have to really take a hard, cold look. And, you know, those people and those cardinals and those bishops who are sitting back waiting for the next pope will clear things up. That's utter nonsense. That's naive. That's passive. God wants us to be warriors. We use our faith and our reason to analyze what's going on in the church, and then we act accordingly. And so, you know, in my mind, you know, the very near future is going to be very sobering for Catholics unless we continue to speak out and continue to recognize and study what's going on in the church every day. Like we pick up the New York Times or watch CNN or Fox News, whatever they do, you have to do the same thing with respect to the politics of the church and the appointments, and to act accordingly. The Holy Spirit will guide us to respond and to fight this fight for Holy Mother Church.
Amen to that. You know, at that Catholic Identity Conference, one of the speakers was Father Maudsley. Now, Father Maudsley has had a very tough time one of the canceled priests like you, Father. He said something really beautiful. He was talking about obedience, what true obedience is, that we can never give up on the traditional Latin Mass. It's illegal for them to cancel that, and so on and so forth. But he said one thing at nearing the end it struck me so hard. He said, you ever wonder why the Israelites were doomed by God to die, each and every one of them, in the desert for 40 years instead of making it to the promised land? And everybody thought, oh yeah, it's probably, they did the Pachamama, not the Pachamama. They did the idolatry of the golden calf, right? Yeah, that must have been it. And he said, no, that wasn't it. Read the account. They were condemned for distrusting God's providence because the odds were so bad stacked against them. Remember, they were supposed to go into Canaan and the spies went in. The 10 were bad. The 2 good spies said, yeah, it's beautiful. It's got everything we ever wanted or desired. It's awesome. Let's go. And 10 of them said, holy cow, those are giants over there. We're like grasshoppers compared to them. There's no way we should go. So the people decide, now we're not going to go. And that's it. God has enough of them because they decided to distrust God's because the odds seemed so stacked against them. You know what? That should give us great hope and courage right now. And definitely not the idea that we should give up in any way, shape, or form. Because the odds are stacked against us. It does look like we're grasshoppers. But as Father, you always say, what's that again? God
Plus one is a majority. Yep.
Amen to that. And that's all we have from this episode of Faith and Reason. Thank you all for being here. We've got a full house today. Thanks be to God.
Yeah, I know. Thank you. It's good to see you again, Jack.
Good to be back, guys.
For all of us at Faith and Reason, God bless you. And we'll see you next time.
Hi everyone, this is John Henry Westen. We hope you enjoyed this video, and to see more like this, be sure to hit the subscribe button below to get all the latest content from LifeSite News. So check out our links in the description to read more, sign up for our newsletter, and connect with us on social media so that you can stay up to date with all of the latest life, family, and culture news. Thanks for watching, and may God bless you.